Now we have our gradient tool group, which is the 13th tool from the top of the toolbar. Shortcut G. Let's go ahead and make sure that's selected. This one's pretty straightforward. Basically, you'll just click, hold, and drag in the direction that you want to create a gradient, and Photoshop will create that gradient for you. There's a couple settings to be aware of with the gradient tool. The first is this gradient slider right here. This is what actually lets you change your gradient. So let's go ahead and change it from something like green to purple. You notice also there's a bunch of presets up here that you can use, but I'm gonna go ahead and use this one. And now you'll see our neon gradient. The next settings just deal with the kind of gradient that you're working with. So as you can see, a radial gradient, pretty much the center of the gradient will be wherever you start. You have your radial gradient. Pardon me. This is your radial gradient. This is your angle gradient. And then a couple of other ones. Blending modes, once again, we won't get into because we're going to cover it later in the course. And opacity is pretty self-explanatory, but very useful for the gradient tool. Let's go ahead and change this back to 100. You also have the option to reverse your gradient. We won't worry about those last two options. Next up, we have our paint bucket tool, and this basically allows you to drop bombs of color onto areas. So you'll notice, let's go ahead and pick this color down here, and when we click on something like this wall, we just paint it in a single click. We can also change the tolerance, so if we moved it up, it'd be more like this. One other thing to note with the paint bucket tool, with images like this, it's usually not super useful, but with something like this, if we were to paint with our pencil tool and wanted to fill in these regions, the paint bucket tool really comes in handy. Go ahead and go back. The last tool in our gradients tool group is the 3D material drop group, or drop tool. Since we're not working in 3D, I won't be able to use this tool, but if we were working with 3D objects, the 3D material drop would allow you to drop textures onto entire objects with a single click. And that does it for our gradient tool group.